Welcome back in from the music, dear listeners. I hope you're all doing well. As for us lost souls here at the station, I suspect we're in for another quiet night. I won't take up too much of your time, but as a reminder, our call lines are once again open, so feel free to pick up that phone and tell us your stories. Now, I'll leave you in the more than capable hands of Madonna with True Blue. As the voice's words vacated the broadcast, music rushed to fill the dead air while a figure moved in his vision. An older man, a few years on from the voice's own age, approached the host's booth as he gave a half-hearted wave. The voice leaned back in his chair, his eyes glossing over a notepad littered with scratches as the door into his soundproof sanctuary gently swung open and the man stuck his head in. "I'm headed out for the night, Al. You need anything before I take off?" The voice hesitated, then answered, "I'm all good. Nicole's here if anything comes up." The voice pointed to a woman sitting behind audio equipment at a desk mere feet beyond the booth's viewing window. Her head hung over something unseen to him. "Have a good one, Dan." The man gave a stoic nod as he clicked the door shut, leaving his colleague alone once more. His eyes returned to that notepad as the chair swiveled back to face the desk. Sparse words scrawled over the page offered meager sustenance for his mind while it churned in this place, but Nicole's sudden movement captured the voice's attention. The host's eyes narrowed as the woman shot up from her station and headed after Dan, vanishing from view as she crossed the window's edge. A faint echo of dreamy pop vocals pierced his head as the host found himself now totally alone, however brief. Fingers wrestled impatiently with a black pen, its tip hovering above the paper. He glanced at something past his beat-up laptop. A potted plant, plastic, of course, fluttering beneath an air vent's mild exhaust. His hand moved with intent as his pupils darted between points, the subject and the canvas. A crude depiction gradually appeared over the pale lines, unbothered by them. Slowly, he breathed, some part of him hopeful his coworker would soon find herself returning to her area, though the white-hot glow of the laptop sitting next to him fought to be the center of his thoughts. Scratches, minor dings and scrapes, worn edges that enveloped the alluring screen. His eyes burned here so late, focusing in on the bottom corner. Not long before midnight. The frequency would become awash in pure, uninterrupted sound not long from now. Songs with no human intervention, no ads or talking, just music. The keepers would leave this place, lonely and silent until the sun's return the following morning. The voice relished this time, so late in the day. His supervisors offered little resistance when he'd asked to oversee the night shift, as it were. With no family to go home to, and virtually no other obligations, the voice took solace in this time. When his co-workers left for the day, leaving behind the graveyard crew to seize the airwaves and allow him a chance at broadcasting. Time would pass with him lost in dreaming, idling at his actual tasks and counting the seconds until he could host. They would never have let him take over a daytime slot. He just didn't have it, whatever it was. But that was fine with him. It was ruthless, the hours. Draining, fatiguing, a broken sleeping pattern, a life in decay. All working in tandem with an invisible operator. He'd shown up late on several occasions, fallen asleep during his actual job, been warned time after time to pull himself together. Yet this was where he was most alert. Like a sentry in the hosting booth, overseen by his accomplices as he got a good few hours in. It was a decent job, paid barely enough to scrape by in a dingy old apartment, but the hours in the booth, when the supervisors had packed up, that was a sort of therapy for him. He was slowly being bled dry, but he subsisted, a pathway to the other side, as grounded as it kept him. Shortly after he assumed his nightly role, he'd worked his way into taking nighttime call-ins. Far from the concert ticket giveaways and keyword guesses of the sun-drenched commutes there and back, these people were surreal, to say the least. At one time, the voice had found himself spurred by curiosity and asked a caller about their strange account, a disturbing monster they claimed to have seen somewhere in the hills of California. He was mostly a non-believer. Nothing had ever given him a solid reason to believe, but hearing these people, their voices sometimes on the verge of breaking, and the vividness of their stories, it was moving to a degree. Still, that supposed storm avoided him. His fingers clawed over the notepad again, his nails jagged from the restless attention they endured. Something old crackled at the fringes of his mind, asking to be let in. It felt familiar, in a way he couldn't pinpoint. Its unseen imprint seemed like it had always been there, blacked out. Jotted next to his sketch, a list of names, haphazard and falling over each other. One of many throughout his papers, a souvenir of his time hosting. Descriptors, excerpts, pieces of stories his callers begged him to hear, laid out with salient disbelief. If it was written, then it would exist. Pulled from nothing and turned into disheveled, imperfect records for only one soul to remember. Was that the feeling? That dark spot in his mind? A memory of a memory, captured from a scarred individual? It felt closer, but still withheld from him. Joe, Eliza, Kenny. The voice had fallen into a habit of asking names shortly after the call started. It mattered to nobody. When that line disconnected, these people would not exist. They would fade from his recollection, from the minds of any listeners, as if they hadn't been real at all. Souls smeared away into vast darkness, blending with the forever as their lives, their stories, turned to dust, keeping them here in his notepad, which too would eventually disintegrate, struck him as a polite thing. Their grasp on our world allowed to persist, if only for seconds more. Wisps of a different memory drifted in his mind, too, one far less clouded. The voice's eyes shifted back to the viewing window as it crossed over the front of his thoughts, impossible to keep at bay, despite his thrashing. As the voice's vision consumed the space ahead, a curiosity overcame him. Where was Nicole? If she'd stepped out with Dan, surely she would have been back by now. The host's leg anxiously bounced up and down as he thought of his coworkers. Uneasy, he looked to his laptop. Several songs were queued up, even in her absence. The man swiveled his chair to face the door. A strange sensation tugged at him, depressing his shoulders. That familiarity was back. Some hidden quality that concealed itself intentionally, even when making itself known to the host. A weight gradually fell over him, sinking him unconsciously into his seat, compelling him to approach. His mind turned its gears, racking to recall the abnormal memory, to restore that deleted patch. While it worked, it begged him to stay put. Every rational part of the man writhed, instinctively fighting that call, while something deeper, something more notably human, urged him to go, to investigate. The host lifted himself onto his feet and slowly approached the threshold. It swung out of its frame with a gentle creaking, and he stepped out into a dark corridor. To his left, a short walk away, that desk where Nicole sat. Still, she was absent. He eyed the stairwell door for a moment, uncertain, then wandered out into the wide space alone. Company policy dictated nobody ever be alone by themselves during active hours. Past incidents had left a sour taste in management's mouth, but this wasn't exactly a by-the-book operation. When Nicole would rarely step away, or Dan would disappear on a smoke break, the voice wasn't keen to rat them out. He could man the airwaves unsupervised. His colleagues considered him trustworthy enough, and he mostly agreed with them. Still, The isolation painted this spot with a vastly different brush. What otherwise was a comfortable, if lonely, worksite now haunted him. He stared ahead into the gulf of darkness that sat in the room's far end, flanked only by a table lamp's soft orange glow. That persistence was still around, beckoning him. Its pull drew him toward that void, though on approach, he felt it shift to his left. His gaze turned to meet a long window, not unlike the one he was often observed through. The host's shoulders drooped slightly as he passed the control desk, shoving an office chair out of his path to reach the window unobstructed. What was making him feel this way? This clandestine force enacted upon him, like any other of our world, nudging him in specific ways, urging him to come and see it. Its signature reminded him of that dark spot in his mind. It was still out of focus. Recognition sparked over and over in his head, fighting to remember. That recall had been altered. Not scrubbed, perhaps. It felt like a tape that had been written over time and time again, degrading the source so heavily that no earthly force, certainly no act of man, could undo its damage. With a hand pressed to the cold window, a shiver diffused up his forearm. His palm and fingertips tingled with sensation as the city carried on with its business outside, barely audible, indifferent to the madness setting in on him. A pit opened up in the voice's stomach when his view drifted down. At the edge of the pavement, where cracked chips fused with dirt and dry grass, he studied the brush just past that boundary. His heartbeat climbed steadily, fixated on that thicket of trees. He had no idea why it spoke to him. That feeling now faded from his presence. But that blind memory had its telltale signs. The weight lingered, pressing down on the man even as he rested against the glass. A hushed sigh left his nostrils as he glanced down at his wrist, adorned with a battered Casio that flashed 12:07 a.m., visible even under its hazy display. He turned over his shoulder, past his chilling hand to see a red light flashing in the booth. Shit. The voice rushed toward the nerve center, his own beating heart laid bare, still alone in this dissolving place. Though other people usually handled call-ins, the voice could accept them in dire emergencies. Hey, if any time constituted emergency, this was it. The booth door clicked shut behind him as he dropped back into the black leather chair and reached over to depress a switch. Hey, thanks for the call, listener. You're on the air with 104.7 The Wave. How you doing?
Alright, I suppose. How about yourself?
There was a sullen way about the caller's voice that quickly arrested the host's attitude. This didn't seem like his typical oddball. Can't complain. So why'd you call in tonight? A lengthy pause permeated the space, leaving the pair in silence as the caller contemplated his response.
We were, going through our parents' attic, looking at some of the stuff my dad left behind. We found a journal in one of his boxes. It had your number written in it. I saw online it was for a radio station, so I...
A shudder in the man's voice trickled out of the line, in time with a low throbbing sensation somewhere at the base of the host's skull. The caller had a quality about him that the voice recognized in himself, if a bit dampened.
It's probably a long shot, but my sister said I should call it. See if you remember talking to him.
The voice sat in its chair, staring off into space before realizing his reply was expected. I might. I try to keep records of call-ins. Does he remember calling in? Again, an extended silence interrupted them, to the host's confusion.
Oh, he passed away about 2 weeks ago.
Suddenly, the caller's attitude absorbed a new significance for the voice. Unlike the host, this man was seemingly new to such a deep chasm of despair. Yet there was an audible steadiness in how the man spoke, however muddied, that suggested he could feel his way through the darkness. With thoughts of mortality once more implanted in his mind, the voice was reminded that for some, that path could become nearly impossible to navigate. I'm sorry to hear that, What was his name?
James.
The brief response clanged around the host's cranium as he flipped through pages of his notepad. Leaving that inky houseplant behind, names flew past, divorced of their stories. Unsuccessful, the voice leaned over to his laptop and dragged the cursor in search of a document he'd been recording tales in. It loaded on his screen, blocking out windows of the station's software and his files from view as his fingers pressed keys. He searched for James's name. Just one call, not long ago. He scanned over its words. Now his pet project was complete, pulled from abstract ideals for exactly the reason he hoped. This man's father would live again, if only for a minute, through his account. I write down some of the stories people call in with. Looks like your father called about 3 months ago. We talked about a watch he had, one he got from his father. Supposedly had a strange kind of power.
A watch?
That's what it says here. He said he could never figure it out. Just assumed it was some old campfire story. A hush fell over the line, while his laptop screen burned itself into the voice's eyes.
Huh. We found a watch in a box upstairs.
The voice offered no comment.
And that's all it says?
I'm afraid so. The caller chuckled quietly.
You know what? It's funny, I guess. I always thought the last thing you left in this world would mean something. Make some legacy. That was pretty naive, I guess. Thanks.
Before any whisper spilled from the voice's mouth, the call had disconnected. He sat in silence for a moment as the music held its breath, waiting to be resumed. It sounded like fiction come to life, the very watch he claimed held some inexplicable power, sequestered away. But a more tangible strand dominated his mind now. That dormant memory, or one close to it, appeared to the host with clarity. His own father. How could something so fundamental, so influential in his life, have been obscured all this time? The host stumbled over himself to switch back to music, denying his listeners any closure for the call. Burned visions of his father's face appeared in his memory like a puzzle piecing itself together. Another face was there too, dissolved within that of his parentage. A sickly, inhuman one that seemed so familiar, yet unlike anything he'd ever seen. The dark spot remained too, negative space that rippled as another memory bubbled to the surface. He tugged at the collar on his colorful Hawaiian shirt with discomfort, then leaned forward. An image of that darkness, just past the parking lot, flashed in his head. It was unnatural, yet pieces of it felt so nostalgic to his subconscious. A feeling he would encounter in his youth, one that slipped into his life, undetected, hidden behind childhood sorrow. His head hung low in his hands and drifted back and forth. Echoes and fragments of two blurred memories blinked in the man's mind like a switchboard. He was just 9 years old, ignorant to the deeper reasons for his plights, yet perceptive enough to be burdened by them. A man's stark features obscured by shadow clouded his head. So much time had passed. Years burned away in a desperate bid to leave his influence behind, but the visage persisted. He could see his younger self, lying in bed in his old house, sick and wasting away. One moment he stood over the kid, disturbed by a pale face and wrinkled pajamas. A hazy yellow consumed the boy's irises. In the next moment, he was that younger self. Tremendous force constricted his chest, while a figure stood in his doorframe, silhouetted by hallway light. His mother. That paralyzing face appeared to him again, present but invisible in this form. He blinked to ward it away, and his mother now sat at the foot of his bed. She brought comfort, but a dark essence pervaded her. a cosmic splinter embedded in her soul. She harbored profound sadness, guilt, just like the face he'd forgotten. He could feel it even through this memory. Strands of black smoke rose from her shape, visible only in the warm glow bleeding in from the hall. She wasn't the origin point for that darkness. It sought her out, latched onto her, then the voice. Vile rot coursed inside his veins for a week, overrun by an incapacitating sickness for exactly 7 days. He'd fallen so numb in that time, disconnected from his body, but that strange feeling stuck around, palpable to him even in his mother's absence. Intensity radiated from the tree line 30 yards from his bedroom window. On the rare occasion during that week when he could find strength to stand, he would stare at that spot. Trees and brush danced with the breeze, concealing something big and old, waiting on him, biding its time. That inhuman face, a jagged crown atop it. Day, night, he would sense it at every hour, ever present and starkly motionless as his parents' voices slithered up the stairs to his room. What were they saying, he wondered. The voice was trapped in himself, forced to listen to those awful cries again. Late into the night, beset by that force in the woods, he would hear them shouting at each other. Things being broken, shattered against walls and the floor. His chest grew heavier every night, suspended between two perils. By the 5th day, his mother loaded the voice into the back seat of their car and drove him to a doctor. As worn down as ever, she waited while the voice was examined, desperate for an answer. Most of that memory had been smeared away by time. Only pieces remained. They did so many tests, chased so many possibilities. Nothing. Beyond its symptoms, it appeared to them the illness had no lasting effects. They whispered back and forth near the door. Psychological? He didn't know what that word meant, exactly. He'd heard it before, but as the doctor showed his mother chart after chart, and he watched the color drain from her face, he figured it wasn't good. She scratched nervously at her forearm, the fabric working its way up to reveal those red marks again. The man glanced back at the pale boy, then stepped out of the room with his mother. 3 days later, that sickness was gone, expelled from him entirely like it had never been there. It left behind no physical trace. For a time, a heaviness weighed on him, though that too dissipated. Something which once seemed so hopeless, a feeling that dominated his every waking moment, had been carved out of him. In its stead, a void was formed, a vacant space that would sit dormant for years, waiting for its tenant. Quiet squeaking filled the booth while the host stared through his viewing window, wide-eyed and rocking in his chair. Paralyzed in this moment, he tried again to recall and crossed his arms. When his mother died some years back, he wasn't sure what to feel exactly. There was a numbness to that loss, intertwined with his pain. She had cared for him, loved him, but she had suffered from her own demons, just like him. It felt like the last shackles of his old life had been taken away, but that damage remained. When his sister was old enough, she took off, desperate to escape their parents. Her departure was most certainly what did their father in. He became so lost in a sea of liquor and pills that when the vices ran dry, he couldn't claw his way out of that bottomless pit of self-loathing that had opened up inside him. His face haunted the voice, that miserable scowl he always wore. But another image lingered in the host's mind. A whiskey-stained glass toppled beside the man's chair, black residue jaggedly lining that splintered crater in the wall behind it. Those men zipping up his father and wheeling him away. No matter what time or where he was, that sight found ways to reappear for the voice. Weeks later, The voice read a letter his father had written. It was brief, and laid out so much of what had beaten the man down in his life. The voice was mentioned nowhere in his words, but not because he was exempt. Hunched over his station, a hand covered his face. It gnawed at him. That pull he'd felt from the window, he didn't want to believe it. That the presence in the woods had come back for him. No. If that thing was back, he was sure it would consume whatever remained of him this time. The presence wouldn't let another opportunity slip away. He was almost certain of it. He leaned forward, hands clasped over his mouth. Brightly, the screen vied for his attention, signaling that he would soon have to take over manual control of the music. Where the hell was Nicole? It had been so long. Or maybe not long at all. The storm of thoughts and memories tormenting the host's head often made it difficult to keep track of time, but marinating in the station's music was one of only a few rituals that could still ground him. Fingers hovered over his end of the station's broadcast. Faintly, a noise to his right, just beyond the booth door, ensnared his mind. His head snapped to stare, hopeful to see his coworker's sudden return, but nobody appeared. A repetitive, nearly rhythmic noise. Far away. No, just quiet? The host squinted his eyes as he listened, the chair swiveling to follow his body's movement. Even past the hushed music, he was drawn to that sound. Firmly on high alert, the host stood up and swung the booth door open and popped his head out. An intent expression masked his face, curious as the sound neither lowered nor rose in audibility. He stepped out into a narrow corridor, his hand clutching the handle behind him while he tilted his head. That unusual feeling was turning, shifting into something different. Not malicious, not yet at least, but captivating all the same. As his focus moved from the stairwell door to the far end of the room, past the booth, the noise seemed to follow his vision. The door clicked into place as he stumbled out toward the control area, increasingly upset by the off-putting noise. Like a snake molting, that feeling was rapidly souring, transforming into a distinctly uncomfortable sensation inside him. Before his mind could negotiate the change any further, a sharp series of knocks rattled the stairwell door behind him. The host nearly leapt out of his skin when the noise enveloped him, spinning him around. Breaking the quiet, a second set of knocks. Well, that door did get stuck every so often, he reasoned. Just a few weeks ago, it got jammed and locked the voice out while he'd gone to the bathroom, and it took him and Dan working in unison to get it open. He pressed his hand to it and pushed, confused to see it swing out so easily. A rush of silence filled the host's head while he glanced up and down the stairwell. Empty. An expression of suspicion overcame him before he suddenly composed himself and slammed the door shut. Nicole was just messing with him. She had to be. It was the only thing that made sense to him. The man's back rested on the cold metal of the entry, which pierced his thin Hawaiian shirt and cut to his core. Had it really come back? No matter how hard he fought to occupy his mind with other notions, that dark figure kept appearing. It was in reach of him again. His heartbeat rose as a tidal wave of emotions and paranoia clashed inside the man. A faint knocking danced into his ears once more, ripping apart his clenched eyes as he flew away from the door. Desperate to return to normalcy, he swung it open again, hopeful that he might catch his coworker. His gaze fixated on the lobby door as a thought entered his head. Gently, more knocks rang out toward him. Whoever, or whatever this was, it wasn't content to torture him like a rat in a cage. It was calling him, luring him out of safety. Tears swelled under his eyelids. He wouldn't go. He couldn't. It might have been Nicole, having some fun at the expense of her sleep-deprived colleague, but that feeling was still out there. A ghost, unseen to him, waiting. He carefully pulled the door shut and backed up to the hosting booth, his hands pressed against that barrier, feeling the grit of the wood under his fingertips. That inhuman visage slowly drifted into his mind, where the face of his father once stood. Something stained into his psyche for so long now seemed like a distant memory, a holdover from a past life, replaced by a manifestation of that feeling. It was almost invisible in his youth. Laid up in bed most days, it lingered in the tree line, shrouded in darkness while the world passed them both by. No matter what happened around him, how fast it turned, it remained locked in place with the host. His father stood over him late one night. That warm glow from the hall no longer offered comfort, instead longing as the door divided the two. As he pretended to sleep, the host's eyes fluttered open, concealed here in the dark. Even in shadow, a clear look of contempt wrapped his father's face. His own eyes adjusted, trying to accentuate the man's features. They were different than normal, unlike anything he'd seen before. Swollen, a deep, deep red, visible even in this place. A face not the man's own. He couldn't remember if it was a dream or a memory, but he recalled, in those captured seconds of his life, believing that must be what dead people look like. His father had died long before those days. The thing that lived in their house was somebody else. That feeling of heaviness weighed still on the host as the unseen presence called to him, drawing his attention toward the room's main area. His eyes darted between the 2 points before he peeled himself off the booth door and shuffled out into an abyss. When that window came into view, steadily it revealed the world beyond. There was no more resisting. That presence was losing patience, playing with its food. His heart sank as he stepped up to the glass and peered out. His vision navigated a narrow alley beside the building, and the edge of the lot just before that thicket. The host could see it, a ghostly moonlit glow that shimmered like the surface of a lake. It terrified him to stare into this presence again. He was so much older, but the tightness that penetrated his chest dragged him back to an older iteration. He felt like a child, helpless and afraid and alone. No one to save him or comfort him. Just this thing before him, as it had been all those years ago. Buried in the host's psyche, that connection was still alive, transmitting their thoughts back and forth as it had when he'd first seen it. A wordless message beckoned him. They would merge if he would stop resisting, finally become one complete organism. The host only had to open that channel in his mind wide enough for the presence to enter. A buzzing sensation filled his body as the presence called out for him, its haunting whispers carrying him autonomously back to the stairwell. When the chilled corridor air struck him, that buzzing dulled. Suddenly, he regained control, his gaze affixed to the lobby door at the base of the stairs. Tendrils lapped at him, desperate to pull the man into that darkness just past the parking lot. The door slammed shut behind him, which fired a realization through the isolating vastness of his mind. If he stayed here, locked in his booth, the presence would eat him alive, make him tear himself limb from limb until nothing was left. His only way out now was to go straight through it. He shivered in a blend of fear and anxiety, then slowly descended the steps toward the lobby. When his hand wrapped around the handle, the memory of that knocking returned and cast a shadow over him. With it, that buzzing had gone, though its weight lingered. He flung it open, instinct moving faster than rationality, expecting to see anyone, Nicole, or a monstrous ambassador of that force. But the lobby too was empty. The host stumbled into quiet space, the sound of his own breathing intermingling with the hum of overhead fluorescent lights. After hours, a few were kept on for the remaining staff. so he quickly scurried between spotlights as though they offered some measure of insulation from the force. Quickly, plate windows came into view, cars and night sky on full display outside. What had formerly been his only shield, however compromised, was soon to be abandoned as he waded into the black ocean. Starved of sleep and overworked, his mind churned to keep this force at bay. He could feel it decaying him, rotting away at his sense of self, just enough to overtake him. It had brought him to the stairwell, believing the host still to be an unwilling victim, despite its sinister seductions. Now he stood at the dripping maw of its domain, a tidal wave of fear crashing against the shores of his mind. He was moments away from exposing the deepest recesses of inner turmoil to this thing in an effort to evade it once again. It would falter, or he would be devoured by it. His fingers tightened around the front door handles, the chill of metal bleeding into his body and further setting him on edge. At least he would go, having tried to save himself. Deafening silence filled his head when the doors parted and revealed the outside to him. Part of the host awaited the comfort of sound, distant and close, but when that suffocating quiet set in, his heart sank. Panic swelled as he rushed to find his car. Where did he park? Recollection of that morning was a blurred mess. After his lunch break, when he'd gone to that sandwich shop, he parked somewhere else. Out on the street? The lot was full right then, and slowly, his mind ground to a halt as he felt that presence nearby, more palpable than ever, even more than as a kid. There was no tree line to deaden it, no distance to smother its whispers. It was here, watching him. Paralyzed with fear, an idea suddenly flashed in his head and prompted a hand toward his pocket. His knuckles burrowed in and fished around while he remained perfectly still, save for the fluttering of his shirt. Cool metal grazed fingertips, and carefully he extracted his car keys, placing a thumb over the unlock button. Rippling grew in his ears, as if the presence was aware of his plan and waiting for him to make the first move. It clicked down, and the car's cabin lights blinked on near the lot's exit. No sound accompanied that first press, but their dim glow lit up like a lighthouse exactly as a hush fell over the presence. He could feel it, lurking beyond his perception, but its location was no longer being transmitted through that channel. Every nerve and muscle in his body exploded as his legs propelled him forward. If he could just reach his car, he could make it. He was certain. When he tore across the lot, the keys slipped from his grasp and clattered to the pavement, pulling his head backward. The host skidded to a halt, turned and rushed back for them. He bent down hurriedly, and as his fingers pinched the fob, he glanced up to see a looming, black shape several yards away. The rippling, wave-like presence had coagulated into a more tangible, distinctly humanoid form. The silhouette of its crown on full view to him now. Long, slim antlers that stretched up into the sky behind the figure. His eyes widened as a pulse fired through him before he scrambled for his car, keys jingling as that same ancient dread injected itself into his body. Hands tingled as they repeatedly tapped the unlock button, honking the horn several times. He needed reassurance that when he yarded on the handle, it would open for him. He nearly collided with his old Camry as he slid up to the driver's door. Catching a glimpse of his tired appearance in the dirty glass of its window, the host climbed in, pulling the door shut as he jammed the key in the ignition. The presence had moved again, only barely on his mind, as he shifted into drive and stepped on the gas. Screeches rang out across the lot as the car peeled out of its space and spun to face the exit, before his hand whipped over to the dial for the headlights. Cast in silhouette below the moon, that figure stood between him and the exit, ready for him to face it. It lurched over, those antlers disappearing into shadow. Once more, this creature resembled that malice from his youth. One hand tightened on the steering wheel while his fingers rested on the dial. His heart raced, trying to find the strength to expose this thing. He could finally strip it of its power. In one motion, he could finally be free from the oppressive despair so much of his life had been characterized by. Sensing inhibition, his muscles moved autonomously. He floored it, rocked by a hitch in the Camry's forward movement. Staring down a speeding shield, the creature remained unwavering, seemingly content to collide with the host, to fulfill its singular goal. But when the headlights flicked on, a ghastly white figure leapt out of his path, lit for only a moment in his field of view, before vanishing into shadows past the beam's edges. His head followed, struggling to comprehend the fragments of what he'd seen. Squeals were flung from tires while the car accelerated toward the exit, his eyes squinting through its passenger window. Darkness receded, morphing into moonlight. The host's head jerked back just in time to see his vehicle crash into the station's exit barrier. In a blur, the boom arm was ripped from its counterweight and launched at his windshield. Glass deformed inward on impact, obscuring his clouded vision while he fought to regain control of the car. He overcorrected when he pulled on the wheel and sent his car sailing over the curb. Scrapes and grinds clattered across his undercarriage as a fire hydrant came into view. Momentum propelled the host into his dashboard, and just before the vehicle rammed the fixture, he blacked out, ushered into darkness by the fading sounds of crumpling metal and chaos.